In my first video under this playlist called My Horde Catalog, my rating was shown as 1940. So somebody in the comments wondered, hey, why is it 1940 when I should be 2600? He thought maybe I had pulled out some old games. And then it dawned on me that that's something I should do. I should pull something out that I played a long time ago just to think about it and reflect on my past actions. The reality was that my rating was shown as 1940 because the time control was different. It was rapid at 10 plus 15 time control. Normally I play 3 plus 2, which is the default. Everybody plays that. Hardly anybody plays much rapid, so everybody's rapids, including mine, is underrated for the most part, except like whoever's at the top of rapid right now. Liu Ying. Okay, he's underrated for rapid. He's 2150 and blitz. But this guy, Azerty 1 through 9, he's like 1800 for blitz, but 1952 for rapid. So he's the only one that really plays mostly rapid. In my opinion, you don't have to do that for like optimal improvement. I think blitz is an ideal time control for horde improvement. Okay, I digress. So for this game, it's an old game that I played with the black pieces against Doooovid. Doooovid is a very methodical person and scientific player. He loves to theorize everything and then test it to see if it's foolproof. He has an interesting YouTube channel with a similar nature of content, which I will link in the description, and he covers some of the most important World Champion games from 2020 Horde World Championship. So, in this game, we get starting position. I will just go step by step from beginning to finish and explain everything in a philosophical lens. So, in general, white has two plans. He can either play for the attack, or he can play to close black's counterplay. Those are the two main plans in any given position, really, where he's trying to build a winning foundation. So, if he wants to play for the attack, he should play e5 or potentially d5. And if he wants to play solidly, he should play a5. H5 is also acceptable. It's less solid than a5, but actually h5 is most likely to transpose into some system based around the e5 systems. So he plays e5, the most aggressive move, and black has two plans. And that's true whether white employs the strategy of grabbing the center and the initiative, or whether white plays the strategy of controlling the sides and shutting down black's counterplay. Those two plans for black are to either infiltrate the back rank as soon as possible, or to play a holding strategy, which is where you wait and attempt to put white into Zugzwang, force him to sacrifice material at some point. I chose the latter strategy. It's called the rook shuffle. Well, rather, the rook shuffle is one way of playing this strategy. There's other opening systems where you can play a waiting strategy. Waiting strategy is not always good, but that's also true about playing to infiltrate the back rank. There's scenarios where you shouldn't play for this plan. In the start position, you can play whatever strategy you want. But the criteria for assessing whether a waiting strategy is good or not is determining if the balance of how much white has to sacrifice the material and how much counterplay he gets, if it's worth it or not. Usually the waiting strategy is good if you can confine white into one color complex for the entire board, say the light squares, right? Let me go ahead and digress to a different opening, so I'm just going to make some random moves. Take. Let's just say he takes, right? And then something like d4, g6, h6, c6, b6, a6, d3, bishop e7, bishop goes back, d2. I'm just making the position, and queen d7. In this position, white controls all the light square colored complexes, so his opening is successful, and this position is really good for black. Highest level players have played this way as both colors. It pretty much favors black, so it's pretty much out of fashion for white to take earlier in such a way that black can create this position. All black has to do is shuffle his king back and forth, basically. And then at some point, white has to sacrifice material on one of these three squares. The queen is very well placed, controlling all three of these color complexes. So, holding strategy is good if you can confine white to one color complex and you can coordinate your pieces to control those squares and kind of work together. But it's bad if you can't do that, usually, because even if white sacrifices material, he might actually come out ahead thanks to his initiative. A5 and the rook shuffle in general, it's the most radical opening to play a holding strategy, but it can work because there's ways for black to create a position where white is forced to sacrifice a lot of material, maybe. So e4, well, d5 is like the most normal way to play. e4 kind of gives black the chance to still play d6 if he wants, and objectively this is like forced win for black, but it's also a system of its entirety, so it's a big topic. I mean, you can play knight d7, you can also shuffle the rook. Mindhunter plays this as black all the time, shuffles the rook. It seems to be working very well for black objectively. But, so h5, because in my development, so I was still pretty low-rated, relatively low-rated. I didn't really have like a comprehensive system for black, so I just always shuffled the rooks because it was what I learned. It's what got me into Horde in the first place. I studied non-Perils games. He always played this version of the rook shuffle for black, with the pawns both on a5 and h5. Nowadays it's much better to abstain from playing h5 and waiting for white to play h5, and then you play h6. This is much healthier, and there's a theoretical debate about whether white wins this position or black wins this position. So in the game I play h5 following in the footsteps of non-peril. In modern practice, white can force a win. I say that with like 98% certainty. But I am currently in the process of researching this opening system as a whole, and when my research is finished, I will publish a video about how to force a win for white, and then I will draw some parallels between this h5 shuffle and the h6 shuffle. So h5, d5, right, like as I said before, it's probably better to just play d5, crossing out white's option of playing d6, since now he can build an e6 pyramid and be much better. So let's get into it. So this phase is simple. White just develops. Okay, now this is the next phase, f6. In this position, the main move is g6, thought to be winning for white. So something like this, and black can either take here, or ignore it and shuffle the rook back. This is really good for white after g5, and then taking here or taking here also are analyzed to be pretty good for white. I mean, probably winning, as I said before. Take, and rook h6, g5, exploiting the fact that I cannot take here because f5 would trap the rook. So I have to shuffle. He pushes his pawns. This is like the main line, basically. And then white can play b6. He can also play e6, I think. But b6 is the most common idea because after the queen moves back, white will be able to establish a d6 pyramid. And white lost material in doing so, but his structure is rock solid because black is waiting. So you might ask, why not play the e6 pyramid and not sacrifice material in the process? Well, this is possible, but eventually at some point white actually has to liquidate his own pyramid for some time. So the pyramid factor is not the most important aspect of the position. It's just more about just what happens after the pawn structure is fixed. The pawn structure is like currently liquid. White has time to spend. He will initiate some trades, change black's structure, and then eventually he will have to sacrifice material anyway. Nonetheless, both of these moves are good here, I am pretty sure. I know this move better. It's what I am knowledgeable about. I am a traditionally learned and trained player. Traditionally learned. So white doesn't go for anything of this sort, but he plays with the same idea in mind for playing b6 and establishing a d6 pyramid. So in playing f6, he will trade off this pawn and establish a d6 pyramid. So the concept is the same as playing b6. This f6 move is a gambit, of course, but it's analyzed to be pretty good for white because it creates that d6 pyramid. I didn't take for whatever reason. He wants me to take, so... And I should take, but he wants me to, so he plays f5, we trade off, I win the material, and then he builds his pyramid. So d6, and I take, and nothing much is changing yet. Just some development. I shuffle the rook because I don't really want to take here, otherwise it frees him to follow up with g5 and play f6 anyway. So I like keeping this pawn here just to try to delay some g5, yet at the same time I am not interested in trading off the h-pawn because that just it just gets rid of my space. So d4, rook h7, d3, we are still in the phase of improving the position. Take, right. I was saying how I'm not interested in taking g4, but the reason I say that is back then, I probably didn't think the same way. Looking back at it now, I would not be interested unless it seemed forced for some concrete reason. The thing is, I have no breakthrough, right? And this d6 pawn does a really good job of restricting my minor pieces. It keeps this pawn at d7, so I can't even move my knight in. And yeah, it cuts this bishop from going here. So really, I have nothing to play for in this position. In terms of a breakthrough, yes, I can keep waiting, but white is getting a very scary initiative. Yeah, he wisely sacrifices on c6. I agree with that decision. And he has to keep his pawns here just to cut off my option of sacrificing on h4. He wants this f pawn to cut this diagonal, this f pawn. So he says, okay, enough improving the position. There's nothing left to improve, so let's go make our next advance. So I go greedy for the material because it's my only claim of fame for lagging behind and being cramped, basically. In this position, I think I misplaced my knight. I think it would be better to play knight a5. The idea behind knight a5 is kind of to provoke b3 because c5 looks a bit weakening, maybe, although it's probably the right move. Because after b3, rook a3, this b pawn is only defendable one time, so I have this plan of like harassing it with bishop d7. So for example, d5 or something, bishop d7, and the point is it makes it harder for him to advance the c pawns. Thus, I think it gives me enough time to initiate some sacrifices. So if I can sacrifice these without running into like a counterattack by freezing this pawns, then I think I can salvage the position by grabbing everything with the queen and maybe breaking through on the queen side. I guess the assessment of the position would be unclear. So let's say f4. Okay, well, maybe not f4, but d4, right? But so I can take, he takes back, I can take, he takes back, and now my queen can probably just swing over here, like maybe, what does he play? He's a little bit stuck. Maybe he can try e5 here just to protect the d6 pawn and attempt to provoke queen takes f5, which would probably run into g4 or otherwise run into maybe just the fact that my queen needs to spend some time to reroute on the queen side, or maybe just spend more time to reroute. So I would not be interested in taking the pawn. I would rather go here, grab the pawn. He can build his counterattack. He probably has to sacrifice this b pawn. If he goes c4, then I just take twice. So maybe this is the best way to try to salvage my position. After all, I won 3 pawns worth of material, maybe. So actually, I think he made some mistake somewhere. But I just pacifies myself. I try to like over-defend things, but it's not the appropriate approach because this b pawn is not an issue for him. So he has more freedom. He can advance his pawns and then have all sorts of attacks because my pieces are passive, which means they're discoordinated, which means he has more freedom, which means he can build a fire and just slaughter me. So at the time, I did not really understand technique, right? So I just struggle and try to hold on. Queen e8, I mean, it's just a one-move threat. He parries it. On one hand, though, f4 is actually kind of weakening in a way because it allows me to initiate a breakthrough and infiltrate on the light squares, because if he tries to block it, then it weakens the dark squares. So I did not catch that, so I just played aimlessly. I had no plan. I just had no plan. I mean, important to try to find a plan. So at this point, my position is very suspicious. I do break through after all, but okay, so maybe d6 can also be played, but I think b7 is good because it does win the rook right away. Yeah, this is definitely a good play by him, and my position is most likely just lost because he has built this network, right? And the reason he was able to build that network was because once my holding strategy was no longer effective, once it no longer forced him to sacrifice material, and once he was able to break through, I have to switch plans. I have to scatter the pawns. I have to break through first. And I did not. I just had aimless play, giving him a unbreakable position, unbreakable network that's thanks to all the freedom that he had in the world. I mean, when you try to play for one plan, sometimes you have to switch plans. So I should have switched from holding to infiltrating. Okay, so it's over no matter what, so the fact that I could delay checkmate doesn't matter. Maybe I can try to resist better somehow, but he has pawns on every file. He has a superb network of pawns that all guard each other, right? I can try to resist, but nope, he just pushes these pawns. Something like this, right? And then I have to control the file, but then actually he can just play here, and he probably could have played that anyway without extra moves, just f7 here, dead lost. I guess that's why I had to control this whole diagonal. So if I want to resist better, maybe better to try queen f5 controlling everything, right? But he can still kill me with h5, and once the pawn gets to h6, I definitely have to watch this diagonal, but that means he can then push d5. I have to like take it. Otherwise, b4, b5, c6 could come later, or b6, depending on my play. And then that will overload him because he will have this assault. So, I mean, I knew I was lost and I got checkmated. Yeah, so what to say? f6 in the opening, it's not so necessary, but it's a good move to throw off the opponent. It may be winning, it may not be winning. I haven't done enough research to be honest, but it's a novelty and it's considered interesting. The reputation is like unclear and interesting for both sides. Anyway, this whole a5, h5 rook shuffle is completely out of fashion. It's just most people kind of at the highest level kind of know the best play for white, and it's just miserable for black to handle all of white's threats that he's able to create. That's just the nature of Horde. It's like trial and error sometimes because philosophy is one thing, but another thing is what's the right order, what's the execution. So yeah, if you want to shuffle the rook, you should probably shuffle it with h6, and I will discuss that in another one of my games in a future video. I hope this helps, and if you want to recap, the recap I would give is just if you want to play for a holding strategy, you should know what you're doing. It helps if you control one color complex, and it helps if your pieces are coordinated to control those color complexes. Second thing, you have to know when to switch plans. You have to know the correct move order. You have to know when to make the one sacrifice on the correct move. So this waiting stuff can be very hard to use, but I definitely recommend incorporating it in your black repertoire because it's very influential to the whole just theoretical status of all these horde openings. Like, okay, black can shuffle the rook against every move except a5 on the first move. So if white wins, white wins. If black wins, then perhaps maybe white should only play a5 just to avoid it. It's all like under debate still. But anyway, to finish off the recap, so what did I finish off? I was saying you have to switch plans. You have two plans as black. You can wait or you can break open something. If you want to break open something, you have to think about which color complexes has white weaken, and then find a way to sacrifice it with 1 to 2 minor pieces and 1 rook. At least that's a standard formula. If you can get a queen on the back rank, then you are 100% guaranteed to win unless white's counterattack is big enough, right? But with that being said, I hope you learned something in this video, and peace out.